The noon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, Arizona territory. Heat waves shimmered off the hard-packed dirt, twisting the outlines of the ramshackle buildings. It was the kind of day when even the dogs stayed in the shade, and only the desperate or the foolish dared to be outside. The stagecoach from Tucson groaned to a halt in front of the depot, the horses snorting, their flanks lathered with sweat. Jake, the weathered driver, spat into the dirt. "Cedar Ridge! All out for Cedar Ridge," he barked. From inside, a handful of weary passengers stepped down, but it was one woman who drew every eye. She wasn't noticed because of beauty, though beneath the dirt and swelling there might have been some. No, the stares came because of the bruises that marked her face, her torn dress, and the way she moved. Careful, pained, as if each step was a battle. Her name was Sarah McAllister. She clutched a small carpet bag so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her hazel eyes darted about, searching for safety but finding none. She had come all the way from Pennsylvania, answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride. The letter she had received had painted pictures of a prosperous man, William Thornton, who promised her security, a fine home, and kind treatment. The truth had been crueler than she could have imagined. Thornton was no merchant with a respectable store. He was a drunk and a gambler who had lost his business months ago. When Sarah stepped off the train in Tucson 3 days ago, he took one look at her and declared she wasn't as pretty as her photograph. His rage had been quick, and his fists quicker. For 3 days she'd endured his anger, until that morning when he shoved her onto the stage, bound for Cedar Ridge, with nothing but her bag and 12 cents. His parting words still echoed in her ears. "Get gone before I change my mind about letting you live." Now she stood, bruised and alone, a stranger in a strange land. "Well, well," a voice drawled from the shade of the depot porch. "Look what the stage brought in." 3 men stepped forward, their eyes glinting with a hunger that made Sarah's stomach twist. The one in front, thin with yellowed teeth, looked her over slowly, like she was a horse at auction. "Damaged goods by the look of her," he said, his grin widening. "But maybe still useful." Quote. Sarah backed away, her breath quickening. Behind her, the stagecoach driver had already climbed back up, eager to move on. Around her, townsfolk watched with blank faces, used to hardship and too weary to care. "Please," Sarah whispered, her voice hoarse. "I don't want trouble." The thin man stepped closer, his breath reeking of whiskey. "We ain't offering trouble, sweetheart. Just a business arrangement. Town like this, a woman alone. There's ways to earn your keep." His meaning was clear. Sarah felt her knees weaken. Death almost seemed kinder than the life he hinted at. But before she could answer, another voice cut through the heat. Steady, deep, unshaken, the lady said she doesn't want trouble. The 3 men turned. Sarah's eyes followed, and she saw him. A man standing tall in the dusty street, broad shoulders beneath a faded blue shirt, canvas pants tucked into worn boots. His face was cut by sun and wind, his dark hair touched with silver. His hand rested near the pistol on his hip, not threatening, just ready. But it was his eyes that struck her most. Gray as a winter sky, calm, unreadable. "This ain't your business, Coleman," the thin man sneered, though he stepped back a little. "Woman's got no kin here, no husband. Makes her fair game." The rancher shifted slightly, his voice still quiet. "Maybe so, but I'm making it my business now." The men chuckled, trying to cover their unease. "What's this then? You looking to buy yourself a woman, Joe?" "Couldn't get one the regular way." Coleman didn't flinch, didn't rise to the bait. He just said, in that steady way, "I'm heading home. And this woman's coming with me." Sarah's heart pounded. The words could have sounded like a claim, another cage. But there was something different in the way he said them. Not hunger, not mockery, but simple fact. The thin man, Tom, shifted uneasily. Coleman's voice dropped lower. "Tom, you've got a wife and 3 daughters at home. You want them knowing you stood out here bargaining over a beaten woman like she was cattle? And you, Pete? Doesn't your mother still take in washing? What would she say if she knew what you were up to?" The words landed. The men shuffled, embarrassed. At last, Tom spat into the dirt. "Ain't worth the trouble anyway. Come on, boys." They slunk back into the saloon, muttering. When they were gone, Coleman turned to Sarah. Up close, she could see the lines etched deep in his face, the way his eyes softened just slightly when he looked at her. Not pity. Something quieter, steadier. "You're coming with me," he said. The same words the others might have used, but here they carried no threat. They carried safety, a promise. Sarah's voice trembled. "I can't pay you. I have nothing to give." Coleman picked up her carpetbag with his left hand, keeping his right near his gun. "Didn't ask for anything." Got a wagon at the livery, 30 miles before dark. He started walking, and after a heartbeat's hesitation, Sarah followed. The crowd that had gathered parted for him, not out of fear, but out of a quiet respect. Sarah noticed it even through the haze of pain and fear. This man carried weight here. He was no stranger, no drifter. And now, somehow, she was under his protection. As they made their way down the street, Sarah whispered, "Thank you." Coleman glanced at her once, then back to the road. Man sees someone needs help. He helps. That's all. But Sarah knew it was more than that. In a town where she was nothing but bruises and shame, this man had seen her as human. For the first time in days, she let herself feel the smallest flicker of hope. The wagon rolled steadily along the dusty trail, the sound of creaking wheels and snorting horses filling the silence between them. Sarah sat stiffly on the bench, clutching her carpetbag in her lap, every rut in the road sending pain shooting through her ribs. Joe Coleman drove with quiet focus, his eyes on the horizon, his posture steady. He didn't try to speak, didn't pry, just let the silence settle like an old friend. As the sun dipped lower, they crested a rise, and Sarah caught her first glimpse of his ranch. It wasn't the grand spread William Thornton had promised in his letters, but something about it felt real. The adobe house sat solid against the desert, its walls warm gold in the fading light. A barn stood square and straight. Corrals held horses that tossed their heads at the approaching wagon, and cattle grazed farther out. Everything looked cared for. Fences mended, troughs filled, tools neatly stacked. No wasted effort, no false show. "It ain't much," Joe said at last, breaking the long silence, "but it's quiet." Quiet. The word wrapped around Sarah like a blanket. After days of fists and shouting, quiet sounded like salvation. When the wagon stopped, Joe hopped down and held out his hand. Sarah hesitated, but the sincerity in his gray eyes gave her courage. She took it, wincing as her feet hit the ground. Every bruise complained, but Joe said nothing about her pained expression. He simply carried her bag and led her inside. The house was much like the man. Plain, functional, but steady. The main room held a rough-hewn table, a rocking chair, shelves lined with jars of preserves, and a large fireplace that gave the place a sense of warmth. Joe set her bag down near a doorway. "That room's yours," he said, pointing toward a smaller bedroom. "Clean sheets in the trunk. You'll find some salve for bruises in the cabinet. I'll heat water so you can wash up." Sarah stood awkwardly, unsure what to say. Back east, no man had ever offered her space without wanting something in return. But Joe was already busy at the stove, his movements efficient, and practiced Mr. Coleman. "Joe," he corrected, not looking up. She swallowed Joe. "I don't understand. Why are you doing this?" He paused, hands braced on the counter, as if weighing his words. Finally, he turned, removing his hat. "Had a horse once," he said, slowly. "Found her half dead on the range. Starved, beaten, left to die. Couldn't walk past her, so I brought her home. Took months, but she healed. Turned into the best horse I ever had." He met her eyes. "I don't walk past suffering if I can help it. That's all." The water on the stove began to steam. Joe poured it into a basin, set out clean cloths, then glanced at her. "I'll see to the animals." "Take your time." And just like that, he left her in peace. Sarah stared at the steaming water, fighting the tears that rose unbidden. No man had ever left her privacy, had ever given without asking. With shaking hands she washed, the water turning brown as it lifted days of dirt and blood. She found the salve and smoothed it carefully over her ribs, the herbal scent filling the small room. Then she opened the trunk in the spare room and found clothing folded neatly inside. Women's clothing. Dresses, undergarments, shawls. She hesitated, realizing whose they must have been. The woman he once expected, the one who had never come. Still, they were clean and whole, and she slipped into a plain brown dress that hung loose but felt like heaven compared to her torn rags. When Joe returned, she was seated at the table, hands folded in her lap. He glanced at her once, nodded. "Suits you." Then he busied himself at the stove. The stew he served was simple: beef, potatoes, carrots. But to Sarah it tasted like a feast. She ate with tears slipping down her face, too tired to hide them. Joe said nothing, just slid a handkerchief across the table and ate in steady silence. When the bowls were empty, he leaned back in his chair. "Rules," he said simply. "You stay as long as you need. You don't owe me anything. Not work, not company, not explanation. When you're ready to leave, I'll take you where you want to go. Until then, this is your home." Sarah's throat closed. She nodded, unable to speak. Joe stood, joints popping from the long day. "I rise early. Coffee's on by dawn. I'll be out on the range most days. Supper's around sunset. Anything you need, you ask. Anything you don't want to talk about, you don't." He moved toward his room, then paused. "You're safe here, Sarah. Nobody gets through that door without my say-so. And I'm not giving it." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the quiet room with her tears, her bruises, and, for the first time since she left Pennsylvania, a fragile seed of peace. Over the days that followed, routine began to take shape. Mornings smelled of coffee and biscuits, left for her while Joe worked the range. Afternoons were quiet, filled with the rocking chair and shafts of sunlight that felt almost holy in their warmth. By evening, Joe returned, dusty and tired, and they shared simple meals in companionable silence. Sarah healed. The bruises faded from purple to yellow, her ribs stopped screaming with every breath, and the sharp edge of fear dulled. She began to tidy the house, mend shirts, even coax the garden behind the house back to life. Joe never asked it of her, but she noticed his quiet approval. One evening, he brought wildflowers in a mason jar and set them on the table without a word. It was the first kindness she'd ever received without a price. For the first time in years, Sarah felt the faint stirrings of belonging. 2 months passed before Sarah set foot in Cedar Ridge again. The idea of returning to that dusty main street, of seeing those same faces that had watched her broken arrival, had filled her with dread. But supplies were running low, and Joe couldn't put it off any longer. "You don't have to come," he said that morning. "Steady as ever, I can handle it." Sarah shook her head, fastening her borrowed bonnet. "I need fabric, thread, maybe seeds for the garden, and I won't hide forever." So they rode together, Sarah sitting straight-backed on the wagon bench despite the ache in her ribs that still flared from time to time. The bruises had long since faded, replaced by sun-browned skin and a strength born of honest work. She wore a green calico dress she'd sewn herself, loose but clean, and she held her head high as they rolled into town. The general store smelled of pickle brine and leather, dim after the glare of the sun. Mrs. Garrett, the shopkeeper's wife, looked up sharply at the sight of Sarah but said nothing. Joe's presence beside her was enough to keep questions quiet. Sarah moved through the aisles, choosing fabric, needles, and a few small luxuries, a spool of blue thread, a jar of honey. When they stepped back outside, the sound of laughter froze her in place. Tom Briggs, the same thin man who had cornered her the day she arrived, lounged against the saloon wall with 2 companions. "Well, well," Tom sneered. "Looks like Coleman's charity case cleaned up fine. Mighty cozy out there at his place, I hear." Just the two of you, all alone. Sarah stiffened, shame threatening to choke her. But Joe only set the flour sack in the wagon bed and turned, his voice calm. "You've got a wife and daughters, Tom. Maybe spend less time talking about mine," the sneer faltered. Tom shifted, but before he could retort, Joe stepped forward so quickly Sarah almost missed it. In a blink, Tom was pinned against the saloon wall, Joe's forearm pressing into his throat. "You're going to apologize to the lady," Joe said, voice even but cold enough to freeze the desert air. "Then you're going to walk away. If I hear you've bothered her again, we'll have a different kind of conversation." Clear Tom's face reddened. He wheezed, "Clear." Joe let him go. Tom stumbled, coughed, and muttered a shaky, "Sorry, miss," before slinking off with his friends. The street had gone quiet, every eye on the pair by the wagon. Sarah's heart pounded. For the first time, she saw Joe not just as steady or kind, but as dangerous when he needed to be. Yet when he turned to her, his expression softened. "You all right?" She nodded, her voice small. "Yes." "Good." He climbed back onto the wagon. "Let's go home, home." The word rang in Sarah's chest, all the way back to the ranch. Life settled again into rhythm. Mornings of coffee and chores, afternoons of mending and gardening, evenings of quiet meals. But Sarah carried a new weight now. One afternoon, while cleaning the spare room that had become hers, she knocked a bundle from a high shelf. Papers spilled onto the floor. Among them, a charcoal drawing of a woman with clever eyes and a secret smile. Beneath it, letters in a feminine hand, and at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a wanted poster. Her breath caught. Joseph Tanner, wanted for murder in the territory of Missouri, armed and dangerous. Reward $500. The sketch was younger, sharper, but it was him. Joe Coleman was not his name, and he was no ordinary rancher. When he came in from the barn, dust on his shoulders, she was still on the floor, the poster spread before her. His steps slowed, his face went very still. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "It fell. I shouldn't have looked." Joe leaned against the doorframe, eyes shadowed. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he exhaled. Was bound to come out sooner or later. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, hands clasped. His voice was low. "Her name was Elizabeth, my wife. We had a small farm near Independence. Morrison, neighbor with money and power, wanted our land. She refused him. He came when I was gone. By the time I got back, she was dying. Told me she loved me with her last breath." Sarah's heart ached as his voice grew flat. Morrison lied. Said she'd invited him. His men swore to it. Sheriff believed him. They called her a whore. Called me a fool. So I waited 2 days, then walked into his house during dinner and shot him dead in front of everyone. Silence filled the room. Sarah stared at the poster, then at him. "So you ran." "Didn't run. Her kin helped me escape the noose. I've been Joe Coleman ever since. Tried to live decent, build something real. But I can't undo what I did." His eyes met hers, gray and steady, but full of fear. "You still want to stay," knowing this Sarah thought of Elizabeth, of blood on garden soil, of lies twisting truth, of bruises fading under Joe's careful watch. She reached for his hand. "Yes, I want to stay." Something broke in his face then, not hardness, but relief. He closed his hand around hers, rough and trembling. From that night forward, there were no more secrets between them. The portrait of Elizabeth stayed in the open, the past no longer hidden but honored. And slowly, something new took root between them. Something not born of desperation but of choice. By October, Sarah stood in the yard with a bundle in her hands. The tattered dress she'd arrived in, Thornton's false letters, the cheap brass ring, the advertisement that had started it all. Joe built a fire, and together they fed the flames. Silk, lies, and shame burned to ash. When the fire died down, Joe handed her a small calico-wrapped package. Inside was a simple steel ring, forged by his own hands, etched with the brand of his ranch. "It's not a proposal, not unless you want it to be," he said, voice rough. but I thought you deserved something that lasts. Something real." Sarah slipped it onto her finger, tears stinging her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Winter came, and with it a wedding in the Morrisons' parlor. No church bells, no fine gowns. Just Sarah in her green calico, Joe in his one good shirt, and vows spoken plain and true. "I do." "Joe said I do," Sarah answered. They kissed for the first time, as husband and wife. Not a promise of fairy tale love, but of steady devotion. Months later, Sarah stood in the schoolhouse they had built together, children's laughter spilling into the yard, her hand resting on the swell of her belly. A new life grew within her, proof that broken things could bloom again. From the ashes of lies, from bruises and sorrow, they had built something whole. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And in the heart of the Arizona desert, that was more than enough. It was everything.